Laos is hosting this year's ASEAN Summit as well as the broader interactions with its dialogue partners, including South Korea this week, and President Yoon is poised to attend the latest event to place emphasis on nuclear disarmament by North Korea for regional prosperity. On this first edition of Press Perspective, we touch upon the foreign media coverage of the ASEAN-related meetings and more. Hello and welcome to our first edition of Press Perspective, a daily panel session with members of the press as well as pundits on issues of interest largely pertaining to South Korea and its surrounding region. Today, that is Monday, October 7th, we touch upon the Yoon administration's latest diplomatic efforts as the 2024 ASEAN Summits kick off in Laos this week. For more, I have Andres Sanchez Braun, a correspondent for Spanish news agency EFE Spain, who is currently based here in South Korea. Andres, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us here. It's a real pleasure.
Right. I also have Aditta Kittikhoun, a senior partner at RDK Group, a marketing and media firm based in Laos. Aditta, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Right, Aditta, the plenary session of this year's ASEAN Summit will take place on the 9th of October, that is this coming Wednesday. And before we delve into the agenda ahead, let's begin with a few words about this organization of Southeast Asian nations and its broad objectives.
Absolutely, thank you. So ASEAN, let me kind of spell it out for you guys, stands for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It was founded in 1967 with about 5 original members. There was Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. And over time, it's kind of expanded to include 10 members, representing over 600 million people. And also some of the world's fastest growing economies, might I add. So the primary goals of ASEAN are to kind of foster economic growth, maintain regional peace and stability, and promote social progress across its member states. Now, importantly, and also somewhat controversially, ASEAN kind of operates on these 2 principles of non-interference and consensus building, which has kind of allowed it to navigate this really, really diverse, really exceptionally diverse set of political systems and kind of maintain this unity amidst this diversity. So this unity is anchored through 3 main pillars. So there's the ASEAN political security community, the economic community, and the socio-cultural community. Now, together, these pillars kind of address everything under the sun, from regional security to economic integration and social development. Yeah, so I think that should be a nice kind of overview of ASEAN.
Right, Aditta. And what do you suppose is the significance of Laos hosting the ASEAN and its broader summits this year?
Good question. So Laos hosting the ASEAN Summit this year, I believe this is the 3rd time that we're hosting it. It's actually quite a big deal. So as one of the smaller economies in ASEAN, we're only a population of about 7 million. We're kind of in this, a unique position to showcase our growing diplomatic role in the region. So in recent years, Laos has worked closely with China, particularly through infrastructure projects like the China-Laos Railway, which is part of China's broader Belt and Road Initiative. And so this infrastructure is kind of transforming Laos from a landlocked nation into a land-linked hub in the region. So the purpose is to kind of offer this better connectivity and trade routes to its neighbors. Now, secondly, this is probably the most important thing. Hosting the summit allows Laos as a nation to assert itself as a neutral venue for complex regional discussions. As I had said earlier, that our ASEAN is filled with politically diverse countries, diverse systems. And so given the geopolitical complexity surrounding issues like the South China Sea, Myanmar, etc., Laos can kind of serve as a middle ground where kind of member states can kind of hack it out and where they feel comfortable discussing both sensitive political topics and opportunities for cooperation. It's particularly apt because this year's theme is enhancing connectivity and resilience. And it's really fitting for Laos because it aims to position itself, like we aim to position ourselves rather, as a regional player in sustainable development and climate change and other topics on the agenda.
Right, and speaking about the agenda, I'm assuming then climate change and sensitive political issues perhaps are on the agenda at this year's ASEAN Summit, Aditta?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess before I kind of give you guys a list or an overview of the agenda, a lot of the ASEAN meetings are spent talking about standards. I mean, we're trying to build this ASEAN community, right, with a very eclectic bunch of super politically diverse states. And so a lot of that is just talking about how to talk about to each other. And yes, the formal language is English, and people understand each other, but there's a how do you say, an underlying language that's kind of there's this barrier between all 10. And so also back to the agenda, there's going to be a heavier focus on, I'd say, food security and energy security, both of which have become even more urgent due to the ongoing global challenges that kind of stem from climate change and, of course, geopolitical tensions like the conflict in Ukraine. The ASEAN leaders will kind of likely discuss ways to kind of strengthen intra-regional trade as well to buffer against global supply chain disruptions. Another thing is climate change, obviously. So ASEAN is particularly vulnerable, as I'm sure you've covered in your TV network, to natural disasters, typhoons, floods, and climate change kind of really amplifies these risks. So ASEAN nations are looking to invest more in green technologies and renewable energy sources. We're trying to kind of foster this sustainable growth that reduces carbon emissions. Laos, for example, has this ambition of becoming the battery of Southeast Asia. We're trying to harness our hydropower potential, of which South Korea is a big investor. We're trying to supply clean energy to its neighbors. And lastly, I would say security. Security is also a critical issue. So the situation in Myanmar, it'll be a very, very, very delicate and sensitive topic. There will likely be a call for more cooperation on regional security issues, including, so apart from Myanmar, we have transnational crime, human trafficking, territorial disputes like those I had mentioned earlier about the South China Sea. And so we'll see ASEAN kind of pushing for closer economic integration under, what's the name of their blueprint, the ASEAN 2025 blueprint, with an emphasis on digitalization, infrastructure development, and also building resilience against global economic shocks.
Right, and those, of course, are the issues on the agenda at this year's ASEAN Summit. And following their talks, ASEAN members will partake in broader dialogue with their regional partners, including South Korea, Andres. And President Yoon Suk-yeol is poised to sit down with his ASEAN counterparts on Thursday. That would be October 10th. What can you tell us about the partnership between South Korea and the ASEAN?
Well, Sunny, this meeting actually comes at a very good timing. Both on the symbolical and on a more tangible front. Symbolical because this year marks the 35th anniversary of the first ever Korea-ASEAN diplomatic meeting. It's been a long road. And on the more tangible aspect, both sides are actually working to sign what is called a comprehensive strategic partnership, which is the highest hierarchy in terms of diplomatic ties with ASEAN. So I would say there's been some key moments in the past in terms of policy towards ASEAN countries that are important to underline. I think one was the previous government's, the Moon Jae-in government's new Southern policy, because that policy was the first regional focused policy towards ASEAN countries that was ever drafted in Seoul. And then after that, there's President Yoon's Indo-Pacific strategy that was showcased for the first time in 2022. And that policy, as we know, has Southeastern Asian countries at its core. And then on top of that, the Yoon government did actually present the Korean ASEAN the Solidarity Initiative, which basically doubles Korea's contribution to ASEAN cooperation funds. And in that sense, this CASI policy actually, I think, is quite important because it's helped, I'd say, give some armor to ASEAN-focused policy in regards to future government changes, maybe shifts in diplomatic policy. And it's also made sure that cooperation with the ASEAN region is more genuinely focused on economic, social, cultural aspects, and not only, for example, in security issues. So all in all, very important. If you ask me, viewers might be asking what kind of weight does ASEAN have in diplomatic terms for Korea? Well, if you look at the numbers, ASEAN countries as a bloc actually are Korea's second largest trading partner, the second largest destination when it comes to overseas investment from Korea. There's around, I believe, around 300,000 Koreans living in ASEAN countries, and ASEAN nationals actually constitute the second largest foreign resident community in Korea. So, all in all, a very necessary upgrade in diplomatic relations, and one that shows once again that Korea wants to play a more pivotal role in both in regional and global issues.
Right, and perhaps expanding on what Andres has just said, Aditta, earlier this year, a presidential advisor speaking within his capacity as a scholar claimed that the ASEAN is Korea's lifeline, while highlighting the need for a more realistic approach to advancing relations with the region. What do you suppose is the feasibility of this particular endeavor?
I think it's highly feasible. Yeah, actually, I think it's actually essential. As my colleague Andres has said, ASEAN is South Korea's second largest trading partner as a bloc. And South Korea has been actively pursuing stronger ties through its New Southern Policy Plus, which focuses kind of on several key areas of digitalization, sustainable development, public health, all of kind of which resonate with ASEAN's own goals for regional development. So there's potential synergy there. I think what makes this approach realistic, or feasible rather, is that South Korea isn't pushing for grand geopolitical shifts. Rather, it's kind of focusing on practical areas of cooperation. So, for example, South Korea is a leader in digital tech, and ASEAN has this really young and tech-savvy population that's trying to, make a name for themselves. And it's an ideal market for kind of Korean innovations in areas like e-commerce, digital payments, smart city solutions, and so on and so forth. In the realm of public health, COVID-19 kind of showed us that, countries need strong healthcare systems, and South Korea's expertise in this area could kind of help ASEAN countries bolster their own infrastructures. South Korea's interest in green technologies kind of aligns well with ASEAN's push for our renewable energy and climate resilience policies. I think we need to focus on these mutually beneficial areas. And I think South Korea is likely to deepen its economic and political ties with ASEAN. And hopefully that kind of creates this partnership that will be critical for both regions moving forward.
Right. And speaking about moving forward, Andres, the ASEAN +3 summit, including South Korea, Japan, and China, will also take place on Thursday, October 10th. What issues do you believe are likely to top talks during this particular summit?
Well, Blue House officials have said that President Yoon will actually present a series of very concrete areas where he would like to enhance cooperation between the ASEAN countries and the +3, that is Korea, Japan, and China. So as far as we know, there seems to be interest on Seoul sides on increasing cooperation, for example, in terms of politics, military exchanges, cybersecurity, environmental issues, as well as the talk of possible creation of safety nets for economic crises. So we could expect some of these issues being touched on the ASEAN +3 meetings. Also, one of them could be the importance as Aditta was mentioning, one of the pillars of ASEAN is the importance of maintaining regional peace and stability. And of course, one of the plus 3 members is China, which has a bit of a thorny relation with some ASEAN members, as the Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, countries where, you know, they have territorial disputes, especially in the South China Sea areas. This, of course, is a very sensitive issue, and ASEAN sometimes has struggled to show some unity in these terms. But once again, this is very sensitive. There's the principle of not intervening and respecting each other's internal political systems. But who knows? Once the meeting's over, maybe we'll hear a little bit about this.
Right, maybe, hopefully. And beyond these broader regional gatherings, Aditta, on the bilateral front, what are some of these shared interests between South Korea and Laos, which you did touch upon earlier on as well?
Yeah, shared interests on the bilateral front. So I'd say there are 2. So South Korea and Laos have a lot in common, particularly in the areas of, I'd say, infrastructure and sustainable development. So South Korean companies have been involved in hydropower projects in Laos, which is kind of key to our pitching ourselves as the battery of Southeast Asia pitch. And hydropower is really central to our economic strategy. And so as the country exports clean energy to its neighbors, including Thailand and Vietnam, and we have plans to export it to to Singapore and Malaysia as well. So South Korean firms really have also invested in road infrastructure, which is really critical for a landlocked country like Laos that depends heavily on kind of improving its connectivity to kind of be land linked. I'd say both countries are also interested in expanding their cooperation in digital connectivity, which South Korea is quite strong at, and also tourism. South Korea is a major source of tourists for Laos. And with our growing tourism sector, we're always looking for opportunities for further collaboration. We're also trying to rebuild our tourism industry post-pandemic. Both countries would share an interest in promoting green growth. We've been focusing on conservation and sustainable development, and South Korea, with its technological expertise, could kind of play this significant role, I think, in supporting those initiatives. Renewable energy, sustainable urban planning, I'd say. Yeah.
Right. And staying with bilateral relations, Andres, President Yoon is poised to meet with his Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba on the sidelines of the ASEAN meetings. What are your prospects regarding Seoul-Tokyo ties under the new Japanese leadership?
Well, I think all in all, I'd say the prospects are good. We've heard positive things in that respect in Korea and Japanese media. Ishiba Shigeru is actually viewed as you could say a progressive, he shares a progressive view in terms of historical issues that have been a setback for Korea-Japan relations in the past. Definitely, he is a progressive, I could say. If you compare him to other potential candidates that could have actually taken the role of prime minister, like Takaichi Sanae, who was way more conservative. But yes, he's expressed discomfort, for example, on things like visiting the infamous Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo. He's acknowledged that Japan had a brutal role when it colonized Korea and other countries in Asia. He's actually said that Japan should keep apologizing. And in that sense, I think it's unlikely that we'll see, at least from the government for now, from the Japanese government, any missteps in that particular issue. And I think that we might even see some corresponding gestures from the Ishiba government, especially given how many people see that President Yoon compromised a lot when dealing with ex-Prime Minister Kishida Fumio, right? the fact also that Ishiba used to be a defense minister, and he has a very defense-focused view on things, might actually help, for example, enhancing cooperation on military terms with dealing with North Korea. On the other hand, some analysts actually said that we shouldn't get our hopes up that fast, that he's a bit of an outsider in party terms, and ruling party terms in Japan, that he's a bit of a contradictory politician. But to be honest, I think all in all, we'll probably be seeing more of that revived shuttle diplomacy that we saw between Yoon and Kishida, and hopefully the one in Laos will be the first of many meetings.
Right, and back in Laos then, Aditta, come Friday, the East Asia Summit will take place. Now, this latest summit comes against the backdrop of wider armed confrontations in the world. Aditta, what are the prospects of a joint statement among the leaders against escalating violence in the Middle East, briefly speaking? Aditta, I'm afraid. Right, I think the audio is off.
Yeah,
there you are.
Yeah. So that's going to be a really tricky one, Suni. So ASEAN kind of traditionally operates on this principle of non-interference and also consensus building. So which makes it really difficult for the bloc to take a strong stance on any issue outside the region, particularly when member states have differing geopolitical alliances. And I'm sure you all know what those alliances are. But I mean, there's a but. I mean, given the global impact of conflicts in the Middle East, particularly on energy prices and trade routes, it's possible that ASEAN leaders could issue a statement expressing concern and calling for peace. So the trick is to really get those words right. I mean, the true challenge will be finding consensus. It's like I had said earlier, consensus is at once our strongest feat and also our weakest. So ASEAN members kind of have diverse views on global conflicts, and some may prefer to focus on issues closer to home, such as the situation in Myanmar or the South China Sea. But I mean, because in an increasingly globalized world, it means that kind of the Middle East conflict does affect Southeast Asia indirectly, and it might take a while for those effects to kind of manifest, rising fuel costs, disruptions in shipping routes, what have you. And so leaders may find common ground, I think, in a carefully worded statement. I think that's what Laos really excels at, is trying to find that carefully worded statement that perhaps makes everyone happy or equally displeases everyone. And so we're trying to call for a peaceful resolution. We're trying to steer clear of direct involvement, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Ultimately, the statement's gonna kind of reflect our broader goal of maintaining regional stability, economic resilience in the face of global uncertainties. I know you guys won't like that answer, but I think that's the reality we're going to have to contend with.
Right. Hopefully we'll know at the end of this week then. All right, Aditta, thank you so much for your insights today. And Andres here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and thoughts.
Thanks for having us here.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this first edition of Press Perspective, our daily panel session with members of the press as well as pundits on foreign media headlines covering South Korea and its broader interests. Thank you for watching. We return same time tomorrow.